Right, here we go. I had been avoiding talking about the whole Eddie Howe in, Eddie Howe out situation. Don't know if anyone remembers a few weeks back, but I actively avoided when everyone was talking about it back then, because the thing that was driving all that chat back then was just kind of social media talk, and it wasn't really something that I was particularly thinking too much about. But after that Man City game, it became something that I did start to have a lot of thoughts about. So today I'm going to talk about it. So, normality has resumed after the Man United game. As usual, we have one good performance, and then just as we have the chance to really build on it with a few massive games, a few season-defining games, get some confidence back into the lads, get some real momentum going, as soon as we have that opportunity, we go and put out an absolute shit show again. For 30 minutes, we were decent, and then after that, it was genuinely fully men against boys. Like, we didn't even look like we were in the same league as City. But to be honest, before I get into talking about everything that I'm going to talk about in this video, I am taking one massive bit of joy at the moment, because despite the fact we just got schooled by City, there is a lot of enjoyment to be taken out of the generational head loss that is happening at Man United since we beat them. Bear in mind, since we beat them, everywhere, all over the internet, there's been loads of Man United fans saying we're trying to create a rivalry that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, who is trying to create a rivalry that doesn't exist? Because what I've seen this week is definitely not us. Now, I try and avoid speaking for all Newcastle fans, but I think in this instance, I can quite confidently say that there isn't a single Newcastle fan that would ever celebrate Sunderland beating Man United. And do you know why? Because at least for myself, in terms of rivalries, Man United mean fucking nothing to me. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't particularly like Man United, but in terms of rivalries, Sunderland are our rivals. Which also, really quickly on the topic of Sunderland, let's just put things into perspective for our being knocked out of the cup. We were knocked out by the best team in the country, not Port fucking Vale. But anyway, yeah, back to Man United, because Man United fans are genuinely out here celebrating their biggest local rivals winning a game against us, and then claiming we're the ones trying to force a rivalry. And the reason they give for us apparently trying to force a rivalry is because we took a photo after beating Man United, the big team photo that we take for every team that we beat, by the way. But yeah, we're the ones apparently trying to create a rivalry. Sorry, I'll just clear my throat with these mank tears. Beautiful. Now, on to the actual team that did beat us, not the team that are celebrating their local rivals beating us. Obviously, in the aftermath of that game, there has been a lot of talk about Eddie Howe's future at Newcastle. Now, I know if I came on here raging after that result, I know it would probably get me a lot more views than I'm probably going to get for this video. I know that it's just easy content because I just sit and shout at the camera, and it's quite easy for me to come up with that. But I'm not going to do that ever unless I mean it. So I don't want to lie to you essentially for views. I'm not going to fake anger. And that's because realistically where I'm at right now, I'm sort of reserving my emotions until after the Barcelona game. Like, obviously I do feel very deflated after the result against City, but in terms of like an emotional reaction, I'm just sort of reserving myself until after the Barcelona game, because it's just going to be one hell of an emotional roller coaster if we do manage to win that. I'm not feeling particularly confident after the City game about our chances of winning it, but I'm just trying to sort of like level myself a bit and not get too down about the City result, as I said, when we've got the Barcelona game in a few days. But having said that, the City game did make me think a lot about Eddie Howe's future at Newcastle. So as I said in the intro, that's why I'm going to talk about it today, because it's not just me reacting to people talking on social media. It is my actual thoughts. So today I'm going to give you my completely honest thoughts on the whole situation. But before I give you my thoughts on it, I actually really want to hear your guys' opinion on Eddie Howe in or Eddie Howe out, because I genuinely do read all of the comments on the channel. I don't get the time anymore to be able to reply to every comment like I used to be able to, but I'll still reply to absolutely as many as I can. But the reason at the moment I'm wanting to hear your perspective on things is because honestly, I'm very, very torn. And obviously I'll explain more about that in a minute when I explain exactly where I'm at with it. But I want to hear your guys' perspectives in the comments, simply because I want points to think about. Like, I want to come away from reading them comments and be like, Those are some great points. So once you've heard what I have to say about it, whether you agree with me or whether you disagree with me, it's kind of irrelevant. I just actually want to hear your opinion. So yeah, I want to know, what is your take on the Eddie Howe in, Eddie Howe out stuff, and why? Why is that your take? Now, before I give you my take, I'm going to quickly recap over the City game. So going into the game, off the back of the Man United performance, I was actually feeling quietly sort of confident about our chances against City. I know obviously we have an awful record against City, but I did have a level of belief. And like, especially once I got into town on the day, like everyone was buzzing. Even the guy who let me in at the turnstile was buzzing. Like the atmosphere leading up to the kickoff, walking up to the stadium, everything, it was electric. It was really, really good. And it gives you belief. I was very excited for the game. And I think that was reflected in the first sort of like 30 minutes or so. But then obviously the way the game actually panned out, it just made me realise just how important Joe Linton was in the win against Man United. And I think at the moment, whilst Bruno's injured, if we don't have Joe Linton and Ramsey as well, if we don't have them two in our midfield, we are not going to cause any problems at all for any half-decent team. Obviously, we couldn't have started Joe Linton in that game. Like, he's only just back from injury and we have to manage his minutes. And obviously with Barca around the corner as well, like, you have to say that Barca is probably the priority out of the two games from either Barcelona or the Man City game. I know obviously winning the FA Cup was probably our best chance of getting back into Europe. But in terms of finances, like beating Barcelona over the two legs is a lot more fruitful than getting into the Europa League. Like, just quickly to go off on a little tangent, I actually looked at the numbers for if you go through a full path through the Europa League and even win the Europa League. I looked at how much money you get for that, and then I also looked at how much money you would get for just going through the round of 16 against Barca and then the quarterfinals against either Atletico Madrid or Spurs that we will likely get. If we went through against Barca and Atletico Madrid or Spurs, them two rounds alone get you more than the whole path through the Europa League and winning the final of the Europa League. You're looking roughly 10 to 15 million per round that we go through in the Champions League for the next two rounds. Like, I didn't actually look any further than that, but for the next two rounds, roughly 10 to 15 million, excluding TV revenue, which obviously the TV revenue in the Champions League is going to be considerably higher than any Europa League games as well. But you're looking 10 to 15 million for them two rounds. You're looking 20-ish million for the entire way through the Europa League and winning the final. Don't quote me on them numbers, because these were just some rough numbers that I found just because I was genuinely curious myself. If anyone does have any more accurate numbers, please do obviously drop them in the comments. But you can see why, just from a financial standpoint alone, bearing in mind money is everything in football nowadays. That was made abundantly clear by the price increases recently. But you can see why, just from a financial standpoint alone, why we are probably likely prioritizing the Champions League. So I'm not sort of saying this to excuse the way we played against City. Like, it genuinely just wasn't good enough. Like, City's B team just made us look like a championship side, or like even a League One side. Like, it genuinely looked like we were just running around going, can we play with the ball now? Like, that was the difference in level between the two teams. It was night and day. So obviously that led me to having some thoughts about Eddie Howe. So let's talk about Eddie Howe in or Eddie Howe out. So after the City game, there was two sort of major thoughts that I was having about Eddie Howe. To be fair, it's not really just after the Man City game. It's also sort of after the Man United game as well. It's kind of a culmination of the two. It's a culmination of where we are right now. So at the moment, I'm having two thoughts about Eddie Howe in or Eddie Howe out. So the first one was directly related to the City game, and that is the clear gulf in ability between Pep Guardiola and Eddie Howe. Like, within that game, it was so clear to see. It was like it was genuinely spelled out on a piece of paper in front of you. The way that City play compared to how we play, like the repeatable patterns, the fluidity in their attack, the organization with the defense, everyone knowing their role down to a T, like that just isn't in our team. It definitely isn't this season. It maybe has been in the past. You can argue it's been there in the past, but it is not there at all this season. And compared to how it was with City, like, it was just night and day between what we see and what we were seeing from them. And I think what that really got me thinking is that realistically, I think I'd always had this sort of like romanticized honeymoon idea that Eddie Howe could potentially take us to you know, Champions Leagues and Premier Leagues, not because I genuinely believed that he was necessarily capable of it, but more because I just really wanted it to happen. Like, it was an emotional kind of thought that that's what I would love to have seen happen. I guess sort of the idea that, you know, everyone kind of doubted whether he'd ever win any trophies with us. You know, people said he wouldn't even win a Carabao Cup with us, and obviously he did win that. So I was kind of hoping for the romanticized sort of journey of him. Everyone said he couldn't win a Carabao Cup, wins a Carabao Cup. Everyone said he couldn't win a Premier League, wins a Premier League. Everyone said he couldn't win a Champions League, eventually wins a Champions League. That's what I was hoping for. And as I said, as much as I never really believed it would probably happen, I still had like a level of hope that it could. And I think watching that City game kind of removed all hope that I think that is ever likely going to happen. As I said, the way the season's gone, there wasn't much hope left there anyway, but that was kind of like the final straw of like, yeah, he's just not at that level. Because one point that I've seen put forward, and it's actually one that did sort of shape my opinion a little bit. So this is why, as I've said, I want people to let me know in the comments what they think, because, you know, if someone makes a good point, I am going to take it on board. And the point that someone has made, and I can't remember where it came from, I think it was potentially whilst I was at the game, the point that someone made was, if you took Bruno, Joelinton and Tonali and gave them to Pep, they would dominate the Premier League. If you took Bernardo Silva, Rodri and Nico O'Reilly and gave them to Eddie Howe, they would likely be mid-table. So what I'm saying there is, you hear pundits say all the time that Bruno, Joelinton and Tonali are one of the best midfields, if not the best midfield trio in the Premier League. But we're not controlling games as if we've got that level of strength in midfield. I've always thought that looking at our midfield, we should be competing at the top of the Premier League very consistently. Like, I have always agreed that we do have one of the best midfields in the league, and if you've got one of the best midfields in the league, you should never be where we are right now. You should never be 12th. Granted, obviously at the moment Bruno is injured, but regardless, like, you know, he hasn't missed that many games, so we should never be where we are right now. But yeah, in terms of quality of the individual players in our midfield, the individual players in Manchester City's midfield, like, there isn't that much of a gulf in quality. If you want to make the case that Man City's midfield is better, that's fine. I'm not going to argue against that. Man City have a team full of absolute ballers and finances that we'll almost likely never be able to compete with. But the gulf in between the quality of them players isn't that far. But yet what they're producing on a pitch as a midfield unit is worlds apart. And obviously with what we're hearing from David Hopkinson, from obviously all the messaging that's coming out from the club about where we want to be by apparently 2030, realistically, if we want to be that club by 2030, we are going to need that elite level manager. We are going to need someone who takes one of the best midfields in the Premier League on paper and makes them play like one of the best midfields in the Premier League on grass. So does that mean then that I'm Eddie Howe out? No, not necessarily. And this is the second thing that I'm thinking. And this is, I guess, probably more in relation to the Man United game. Now, before I get into my second point, just because I see the other side of the story doesn't then mean that I think Eddie Howe is exempt from criticism. If you go back to my video 2 videos ago, it's not the last one, the one before, if you go back to that video, you will see that I am, when it's needed, I will be very, very harsh on the criticism that I give Eddie Howe and the players. So I 100%, I'm not just a happy clapper who will just sit there and support no matter how shit we are and just thinks, you know, oh, we just have to keep on supporting and just get behind them and they don't deserve criticism, just keep on clapping away. I don't think that. Definitely don't fucking think that. I'm not going to sit here and settle for mediocrity. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is just trying to see the other side of the picture, because that's how you have a balanced argument. If you're trying to argue any point, if you're in the quest for knowledge, I guess, you need to look at both sides of the story and you need to be able to see both sides of the story. So the other side of the story for me here is, as amazing as Pep is, and, you know, getting that elite level of manager would be kind of what would take us to the next level. And as I've said, I don't think potentially Eddie Howe is that elite level manager. As amazing as Pep is, we're not going to get Pep Guardiola. So it doesn't matter how good he is. It doesn't matter how levels apart from Eddie he might be. It's irrelevant. We're not going to ever fucking sign him. So the question here then is, if we do need that, who do we bring in that is that? Like, if we get rid of Eddie, who do we bring in that is that elite level manager that can take us to that next level? Because it's not Iraola, it's not Oliver Glasner, because back when all this Eddie Howe in, Eddie Howe out stuff first started, people were saying, let's replace him with Oliver Glasner. Like, the first people that got on board with this Eddie Howe out stuff were suggesting Oliver Glasner. And so, you know, we've seen how that's planned out, because as soon as he's lost Gahey, that Crystal Palace team's fallen apart. So before I get into talking any more about this second point that I've got to make, if you are on the Eddie Howe out bandwagon, obviously I said I wanted to hear your perspective on things. So, you know, if you're Eddie Howe out and then why. If you're Eddie Howe out, I also want to know who exactly you would actually put forward to replace him, because I can fully understand the reasons for being Eddie Howe out, but I do want to know who would be the replacement. Like, who do you think could genuinely take us to that next level? You know, who do you think could realize that ambition of the whole what we want to be by 2030 and, you know, go toe to toe with Pep as that elite level coach? Because my second thought is that as much as Eddie might not be that elite level coach, he might not be of the bracket of Pep Guardiola, Klopp, Tuchel, Zidane. Like, he might not be in that sort of top level tier. But what I would say is he is the top of the next tier below. And the reason I say that is because if you look at all the other big clubs outside of maybe Man City and Arsenal, so if you're looking at, you know, the traditional big six, if you're looking at Man United, Chelsea, Spurs and Liverpool, all of them are relatively unhappy, like long term, with the managers that they have either recently had or currently have. Like, in comparison to your Arsenals and your Man Cities, none of them you really feel like have found their sort of like one, you know, the guy who's going to be around for, you know, potentially like the next 5 or 10 years. But at the end of the day, them clubs are still recognized as some of the biggest clubs in world football. Like, in terms of their global pull, they are still massive clubs, and they can attract a lot of them, maybe other than Spurs, a lot of them can attract some of the biggest names in football to manage them. But despite having that pull, a lot of them still can't seem to do any better than an Eddie Howe. Obviously, I know everyone's going to be like, but Ben, we're 12th and them teams aren't 12th. Again, obviously, except for Spurs. Spurs are a bit of the anomaly here. They are just a heap of shit. So let's just put them out to the side. All their managers, they have managed to, when they've been in the transfer windows, they've managed to get their first choice signings. Whereas Eddie didn't really get any of his first choice signings. Maybe you could argue Alanga, but outside of that, like, if we had this season, if we'd have either obviously kept Isak, which was probably never really on the cards, but if we'd have got Ekatike, João Pedro, maybe Mbeumo, if the reports are correct that we were in for him, like James Trafford, if we'd have got any of these players in, I don't think anyone can realistically say we'd be in the same position that we're in now. And the managers that did manage to get their first choice players, so your Arne Slot, Maresca, Amorim, Thomas Frank to a certain extent did miss out on a few. Again, just sort of ignoring Spurs. Arne Slot, Maresca and Amorim, none of them, I mean, 2 of them aren't even still in a job. Thomas Frank is also not still in a job. And Arne Slot, I don't think many Liverpool fans are particularly too pleased with him at the moment. So what I'm essentially saying here is, let's say we get rid of Eddie Howe, right? I can imagine either Man United or Chelsea would likely come in and snap him up straight away. And I think then when you're thinking about getting rid of Eddie Howe, you have to realistically think, if we get rid of Eddie Howe and he goes to a Man United or a Chelsea and is then able to sign all of the players that he wants, like, guaranteed he gets them players because they can throw more money at it. They have that bigger pull that they have just as being, you know, like a Man United or a Chelsea. If he can get all of the players that he actually wants, I personally at least would say Eddie Howe would likely stable the ship at Man United and get them consistent Champions League football. And again, same with Chelsea. I think if he were to go to Chelsea, he would stabilize the ship there and get, you know, consistent Champions League football. So I think for that reason, I do find it hard to say that I'm Eddie Howe out. Like, there'll be a lot of people who criticize, you know, Eddie Howe's inability to use Voltemada and say that he wouldn't be able to use the players at like Chelsea or Man United, but the difference being that he would just be able to get all the players that he can work with. So he'd be able to get a style of football working at Chelsea or Man United just using players that he wanted to sign. He would get all of his first choice signings. So what I'm essentially saying is, until someone becomes available of that elite level that can definitely take us to the top, until that person becomes available, I find it hard then to just be Eddie Howe out, because until we can attract that person that is ready to take us to the top, you know, the Peps, Klopps, Tuchels, Zidanes that I said before, maybe you could even argue Emery is that level. Until that manager becomes available, I would say that Eddie is probably the best we can get at the moment. So does that then mean that I'm Eddie Howe in? Also no, because my point here is that if PIF tomorrow were to sack Eddie Howe and bring in someone that they genuinely believed would take us to the next level, I would also completely understand why they've made that decision, and I would completely back that decision. So again, in the comments, for anyone who is Eddie Howe out, if you can give me a manager that is not only capable of taking us to that elite level, capable of going toe-to-toe with Pep or whatever, but not only that, is also available and achievable for us at Newcastle. If someone can give me a manager that ticks all them boxes, then yeah, I'm Eddie Howe out. Otherwise, I guess I'm Eddie Howe in. Because for me, Iraola, Oliver Glasner, whoever else that people have been putting forward for it, like they're not it. Because the way I'm looking at the moment is if a Man United or a Chelsea can't attract these elite level managers, then what makes us think that we can? Why would a manager want to come to us and be constantly battling with PSR, constantly getting the second choice players because we can't throw as much money at the situations? As a club, we don't have the pull that these other big clubs have. Like, you have to be realistic. If Chelsea and Man United can't find it, why would we be able to? So anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm not necessarily saying they're right. That's just what I'm thinking about it all. Obviously, as I've said, let me know in the comments what you're thinking about it all, because I want you guys to give me more to think about it all. Obviously, the pressure is going to mount up massively on Eddie Howe should we lose to Barcelona on Tuesday, because that'll just essentially mean that our season is over. There's literally nothing that we can then do really with this season. So as I said at the start, I'm reserving all of my kind of emotion until after that game. I have managed to get tickets for the game, so we'll be going, and it is also on my birthday. So please, lads, please don't ruin my fucking birthday, and please don't play like a heap of shit. But anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, please drop a like and subscribe as a nice little birthday present for me, please. Thank you. And that's all the noise for this one. Until the next one.